So it was with absolute horror that I arrived out of my prison cell after about 2 years. 2 years, as I said, 7 months, to discover that some of the principles that I held as inherent in Western society, inherent in the Western judicial system, were under onslaught because of a gross act of terrorism on 9/11. Somebody had suspended the idea of a speedy trial in Britain, in Canada. A gulag had opened up in Guantanamo Bay. I then had to be exposed to the images of Abu Ghraib, where, quite rightly, a few American soldiers have finally been punished for that. But I'm still waiting to see the general stand trial for that, because they would not have been behaving like that without orders, without tacit consent and instruction from their superiors. And the evidence is there that that has happened. And as I came out of prison, I found that there were people being held in detention in this country, classified as terrorists. And they may well be. I'm not going to get into the guilt or innocence of people that we have security certificates on. But the fact of the matter is that these people are sitting there. They have no right, their advocates have no right to see the evidence that is held against them. A security certificate has been issued, and that is it. I'm sure Mr. Kotler can bring me up on various, correct me on some of the finer points of this. But the only thing that has been heartening to me is, during this time, one country in this has had a judiciary that has had the moral backbone to throw out those laws as a violation of its constitution or its effective common law and the European Charter of Human Rights. And that was the law lords in London. Now, they've denied me the right to sue my captors, but they, at least over the last 2 years, have thrown out unlimited detention without trial. And have also thrown out the idea that those accused of crimes of terrorism do not have the right to see the evidence. They have also thrown out the idea that evidence that is brought against an individual can come from a source in which torture has been used. Because the problem is that a number of Western countries now have adopted an attitude of don't ask, don't tell. Somebody provides them with intelligence gathered in a place such as Afghanistan or Tajikistan or Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, for instance, one of their popular methods of torturing people is to boil them alive. The evidence, as I said, gathered by those means can then be used in our courts. Except last October in Britain, thank God, the law lords turned around and said, hang on a second, provenance of such evidence needs to be checked. We will not accept that our own officials conduct torture, and we will not allow torture in our own country. We're damn well not going to accept evidence that has been obtained by torture elsewhere. And that is a great ruling. The problem is that this debate still rages. Many countries still do not recognize the invalidity of evidence gained by torture and still happen to believe that it should be used in a court of law, that it should still be used to lock people up without trial. And one of the reasons for this is that people, many senior people in our governments and our intelligence networks, actually believe that torture is an effective intelligence gathering tool. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that torture will not get some valuable information. I know that when the Saudis tortured me, as I said, I'd have told them I was Mahatma Gandhi if necessary. And if they'd actually ever been after some real information from me, maybe I would have given it. But the problem with the effectiveness of torture is that in reality, if you don't know what it is you want to ask the person in the first place, what you will get from that person is a false confession. And so say you arrest 10 people, you torture 10 people. One of them is the person you're looking for, the others aren't. The problem is you will now have 10 criminals because they will all confess. They will all confess to different things and all confess to what they think you want to hear. So in the midst of that mess, where you might have one small grain of truth, you end up with a morass of bad information which you then send your operatives out, your intelligence operatives out checking out. It has long been known that the most effective method of fighting terrorism, of gathering intelligence, is not hanging someone upside down and beating the crap out of them until they beg for mercy. It is by penetration agents. The British government in the Second World War was exceedingly successful. They started off with something called the London Cage, which is actually a place where a lot of brutal torture occurred on potential on people they thought were German spies. They dumped that approach when they found that tea and sympathy was a more effective means of getting intelligence out of them. And they also came up with a slightly brutal but a little bit more civilized method of dealing with the spies. And they said, you have two choices. You either become a double agent for us, or we shoot you. And they had remarkable success with that. At least it was fair. They weren't torturing the people anymore. They said, you've been caught as a spy. International law allows us to execute you. So that's what's going to happen. Or you can work for us. And the result of that was they actually turned the entire intelligence network that Germany had stuffed into Britain on its head. That was the most effective means of their gathering intelligence, of knowing what the Germans were up to within the British Isles during the Second World War. And time again, this is shown to be the case. One of the greatest series of studies that advocated that torture is a good intelligence gathering method comes out of the Algerian rebellions during the 1950s, when the French used their Foreign Legion paratroopers to brutalize huge segments of the cities in Algeria, and to use interrogation methods which were as bad, if not worse, than anything I went through. And the French then justified and went around lecturing at this place such as the School of Americas, the intelligence school in the United States, was lecturing to the CIA, lecturing even to the British intelligence, how effective their methodologies were. It turned out that that was a rather large lie. What they were doing was they were attributing the intelligence that they gathered from the network of informers to the people that they'd been torturing, because otherwise they had been doing something which was morally reprehensible, potentially a criminal act even under French law at that time, and Algeria at that time was French territory, and therefore they had to have a justification for it. And time again, every time I go over any of this material, review any of this, I find that when torture is discussed as an adequate intelligent method, when I look deeper into it, what happens is the torture is being used to justify, the intelligence that's gathered is being used to justify the torture that took place. But oftentimes, in every case that I've looked at, even including some of the people who've been arrested concerning 9/11, the torture, the information that was gained, claimed to have been gained out of them by coercive interrogation or torture, actually came from other sources and was then attributed to them.